This is 100 business ideas for under $100, and today we're going to talk about screen printing. Screen printing is a great way to make custom shirts, towels, face coverings, other apparel. It doesn't cost a lot of money to get started, and all the materials basically fit in a shoebox, so it's not going to take over your living space. Screen printing is a fantastic way to make one-of-a-kind, customized garment items, tote bags. You can even do posters and big prints and other items. You can use these items to advertise local restaurants, to support local workers and institutions, maybe to celebrate a graduate. There's all kinds of stuff you can make out of screen printing. Once you get the techniques down, it's super easy to do. And this is how you can bootstrap your local business. And what does bootstrapping mean? That means that you basically take something very small with limited resources and you grow that into a larger business by feeding the profits back into the business. So you start small and you add on, sort of like starting with a folding table and a old tablecloth in your garage to make a video that you hope will be something bigger someday. How does screen printing work? It's very simple. You need a screen. And basically, once you make your screen, you push ink through this screen, this area where you can see my hand behind here. That's where the ink is going to go through, the open areas on the screen. You push it onto a garment, you let it dry, you pull it off, and there's your item, customized. So of course the trick of this is, how do you make these screens? What is in a basic screen printing kit? You don't need a lot to get started with screen printing. And in fact, what I'm going to recommend most people do, instead of assembling all their custom materials from scratch, although I will get to that, let's talk about, again, bootstrapping this business and scaling up. The easiest way to do that is to buy a kit that includes everything you need to start screen printing without having to buy really anything extra. So there's a company, Speedball. They make a lot of materials in this area, and they have a lot of different kits. I'll include some information at the end of the video, and I'll show you basically what comes in one of these sample kits, because there are ones made by other manufacturers, or you may want to go out and just go to your local art supply store, or maybe order some of this stuff mail order. So the first thing you're going to need is a screen. And normally these screens come blank, and when we make one of these in a few minutes, you'll see what that looks like. But you can reuse these. So you can get started with only one screen, and you can clean it off and you can reuse it a bunch of times. Of course, the advantage to starting to make your own screens is that if you have a design and you need to make more copies of it at a later date, you get additional orders, then you can come back. So being able to make your own screens is really important. But to get started, start with one screen. Sell that first few batch of t-shirts, wash the screen out, and again, build up some cash reserves so you can buy the additional supplies to make your own screens. Start small and build up. You don't have to invest a lot of money at the outset. So what you will get in any basic kit is, again, a screen to start out with. I'll put that over here. Some kind of paint. There are different types of paint. Some, like the shirt I'm wearing here, kind of soak into the garment, nice and soft. There's a puffier paint that sits on the surface. But bottom line, you're going to need some type of paint. Most kits will include a couple sample colors. If you decide to buy it yourself to start out, you want to get what's called screen printing ink, but you want to get some basic colors. Don't get, there's some fancy bright colors, but try and get a color that will appeal to the most number of customers. And that probably means some basic primary colors, red, yellow, blue, and then maybe white or black. So you'll need some paint. You will need some type of cleaner after you use one of these screens. If you want to reuse it, you'll need some kind of spray-on cleaner. Again, most kits include some kind of what's called an emulsion remover or a screen cleaner to clean the screen. You will need a little spreader. Again, this is a very simple one that came with a kit that I started with. You could actually even just use an old plastic gift card or something if you want, but you want a spreader. And by the way, the spreader has to fit inside the screen. Don't get a spreader that's too wide if you buy one separately that it won't fit. I like to use a little rubber spatula. This doesn't come with most kits. This was a couple dollars at Target, just to help spread the ink and the paint around. initially and move some of the extra paint off the spreader. And then a couple of other specialty items you're going to need. So there are a few ways, I'll talk about this in a few minutes. There are a few ways to make screens for your print. You can cut out with a small X-Acto knife. You can cut out designs by hand and use that to make the screen. You can paint. You can get a little paintbrush. You will want a little paintbrush, by the way, but you can paint your design with what's called drawing fluid and make the screen that way. I have no artistic ability whatsoever, so I'm going to show you the third way, which is making screens from basically a custom print that you design on a computer. You can use what's known as photo emulsion for that. So again, most kits come with a sample amount of photo emulsion, and you'll need some of that for the method that I'm going to show. Here's the drawing fluid I mentioned. Again, kits come with that. It's great if you can paint or do a design yourself. This is a great technique for being able to do that. Screen filler, you'll find. You see this red stuff on this screen here, this area of red stuff. You'll see when we wash the screen out, sometimes, well, there's little spots we missed, little holes, little imperfections. Sometimes that adds a little bit of character to the shirt. But sometimes you've got a design that's otherwise really great except for one big blotchy area, which for some reason didn't work out correctly. And the screen filler is you basically just paint in that area and you cover it up and it doesn't mess up your final print. And again, there's some other cleaning items here. This is just a bigger bottle I bought later on. Oh, one other item I don't have right on the table right here right now is laser transparency paper. That's going to be very important. It's just overhead paper. It's a clear plastic sheet. You'll see when we print something out later, that's what's going to be our design, and it's going to help us transfer it onto the screen for making this shirt. How do you make your own custom screen for making a print? Well, the first thing you're going to need is either a table saw or a compound miter saw. No, I forgot. This is supposed to be under $100, so we're going to have to do this the hard way. If we're not going to use the compound miter saw or the table saw, we're going to have to use this good old standby, the common hand saw. And if you don't have access to a hand saw, you can buy one cheaply online or get one at any big box retailer. It's not as quick and easy as the electric tool, and it requires a little bit more elbow grease, but it'll work just fine. You're also going to need some scrap wood to make your own frame. I found these two pieces laying around. Of course, you could probably reuse an old picture frame, but just finding some old wood. It's got to be the same thickness all around for your frame. That'll make your life a lot easier. The pieces I found, it looks like I can only make a frame about 11.5 inches wide, which is tricky because my spatula has to fit inside. I think it's just going to make it. You can make frames of any size, but remember, whatever you're going to use inside, if not a big spatula like that, maybe a gift card or an expired, a credit card or something, if you push the ink, it's got to fit inside. You have to have something to push the ink through the screen that will fit inside the frame. So what I'm going to do is basically cut 4, whatever size I pick, I'm going to cut 4 equal pieces. I'm going to try and make my frame, as I mentioned, 11.5 inches wide. If you don't have a ruler, use a sheet of paper as your basis for measuring. And then once you cut that first piece, you can just use that to make the marks on subsequent pieces. Since I'm not going to be using the compound miter saw or the table saw, I'm going to have to cut the wood for my frame the old-fashioned way with a hand saw. Any type of saw will basically work. We're not going to be cutting a lot of wood here. Wear some eye protection, be sensible. The thing that we're going to do is find some scrap wood around. We need to cut 4 pieces of wood of equal size. Now for my spatula and the wood that I found around here, I'm going to try and cut a frame around 4 pieces around 11 inches each. You can cut a smaller frame. Remember, your spatula is going to need to fit inside that frame. So if you're doing like a baby onesie or something, you're probably not going to make as big a frame. You might be using, instead of your spatula, an old store gift card or expired credit card to push the ink through. But if you don't have something that's your scraper that's going to fit inside the screen, it's going to make it very hard to transfer that ink through to the shirt. So this is, again, some narrow scrap wood. It could be a little, there's no wrong or right size. It could be a little wider, but it all has to be, should be the same thickness. And again, I'm going to just cut 4 pieces here, and we'll get on to the next step. A trick that you can do when cutting a piece of wood is to pull the saw towards you for the first few cuts. That'll make a nice groove in there that'll hold your blade in place. And then once you do that, I'm going to try not to cut the tablecloth here. Finished. Okay, I've got my 4 pieces. Now you're thinking, did he go cheat and use one of those saws for the other 3? Well, does this look like the kind of quality cuts you would get if you used a power tool? No. I just wanted to show, get off some of the broken bits here, but I did cut these all by hand, and that's just to prove the point that these pieces should all be hopefully the same length, but perfection is absolutely not necessary here. So let's see how we take these and do the next step in making our screen. This is how we lay out the pieces of wood to make that picture frame shape. So you see, if we look at the corner here, the pieces don't fit together perfectly because how I cut them, that's fine. But there are 2 pieces that go on the outside, the left and right here in this video, and then there are 2 pieces that go on the inside, and that's why we wind up with that rectangular shape. Now let's look at how we fasten these items together. There are so many ways to connect 2 pieces of wood together. You could use some wood glue and try and clamp it together or pin it together if you have the patience for that. I don't right now for this video. You could use screws. Those would be great. Or you can use nails, and there are pros and cons to each. One of the key things is you're going to need to use, whatever you do, I guess unless it's glue, use nails or screws, you're going to need to use 2 on each one of these corners where it connects. Because if you don't, we're going to stretch the screen over this. And if you only have 1 screw in here, this wood is going to have a tendency, no matter how much you tighten it, 1 screw or 1 nail, it's going to have a tendency to twist, and our screen isn't going to be flat, and that's not going to work out well. I have a bunch of other little screws and fasteners over here, but what I like to use are just simple little, they're called finish nails. Sometimes if they're shorter and tinier, you might see them called brads. Obviously, you want to make sure that it's thick enough to go through 1 piece of wood on the edge and into the other. I like these because they're small, and so there's going to be less of a chance for them to split the wood. The bigger the nail or screw that you use, the more likely it is that, and depending on the thickness of the wood, the more likely it is that as you're fastening it together, that the wood is going to crack and split, and then you're back to cutting wood by hand again. So I'm going to nail a couple of these corners together and then show you what that looks like. Let's attach one of these corners together. If I had a small drill bit, a little pilot hole would be great for this nail, but again, this is what's nice about these tiny little finish nails is there's not a lot of likelihood that the wood is going to split. I'm not going to nail this to the table, I'm just going to get it started here. Don't worry if that happens. See, happens to everybody. And I think I'm going to just get the other nail started here also, or at least make a little mark for it. Always better to hold the hammer by the end. Don't hold the hammer all the way up here. It works better if you hold it near the end. And this is kind of a tough camera angle to see everything. Spending more time looking at the camera than I am looking at what I'm doing. Now, how do we nail this way? Well, there's going to be very hard if I try and nail this here like this. What I like to do is, for something simple, what I will do is Let me move the camera here up a little bit. What I'll do is stand this on a hard surface like the floor, and I will just hold the pieces like this and nail down straight from the top. Let's see if I can do that on this table here, if I can get the camera up a little bit higher. Let's see. So I will just hold it here. And let's see, a little bit higher. There we go. And I will just, while I'm holding it, put these nails. There we go. One corner done. Now, you'll see, doesn't bend because we've got those two nails in there. A little bit less accurate maybe, and it's not perfect, but it doesn't matter. You actually don't want the screen to sit perfectly flat on the shirt surface anyway. You want kind of a little bit of elevation underneath between the shirt and the screen to give the ink a place to go. So I'm going to go ahead, nail the other three corners together, and then we'll move on to the next step of the screen construction process. Okay, our simple frame is done. I did some nails on this side, decided to try a little test. I used some screws I had on the other side here. It really doesn't matter. You can see it's not perfectly flat. It doesn't have to be. Try and get it close. Should be rectangular. So let's talk about the screen material. You can buy this material at a fabric store. It's basically very similar to what a veil on a wedding dress is made from. Don't go cutting up any heirloom wedding dress you may find lying around somewhere. But basically what you want to do, you can buy this stuff online too. It's super cheap. And you'll find there are different dimensions. It really doesn't matter. It has to, the space in the screen basically controls how much ink is going to get through. You can find just cheap material and then experiment with what type that you like in terms of the print that it produces. But honestly, I bought this material online. I didn't even really look at the size. It just said screen print material. I think it was under $10 for a ton of it to make tons and tons of screens. And what you want to do is cut out enough to cover your entire screen. And if you really want to be precise here and stingy, you can try and basically go all the way to the edge of the wood. Going a little bit past is okay, but what you don't want to do is go up to the edge inside. You want to go well past it, all the way to the edge of the wood, maybe a little bit extra. So cut out a rectangle like that, and we will talk about fastening it in just a second. Okay, we've got our sample piece of screen cut out here, and now we need to fasten it. Oh, you may notice there might be some wrinkles in the screen. That's okay. Even as we pull it tight, there may still be some little wrinkles and shapes. It's really not going to make a difference in the final product. And actually, the cool thing about screen printing is all these little imperfections that there might be in the final print kind of add up to giving it a little bit of character, and it's one of the things that makes screen printing look really cool. So we have a staple gun here. Now you could use nails, you could hammer staples, and I like the staple gun. Again, staple gun is not an expensive item. You can get them for probably under $20 with 1,000 staples. So this is something that you'll use for a lot of other you'll find a lot of other uses for it, and of course it's just something that you're going to use over and over again as you make additional screens. So I would just simply start, put a couple staples in. Now I probably could adjust the tension here a little bit. You'll see that these staples are not going all the way into the wood. That's okay. We're going to hammer them down later. And then pull it a little bit tight. Put some more staples in. Maybe put some on the side here. What I'm going to do is spread it out, pull the screen a little bit tight, and then I'm going to come back and put in some additional staples later on. once I get it pulled kind of tight. And you'll see some of these lines and creases kind of vanishing as I stretch it here and staple it while I'm stretching. Let's put one over here, I think. No one will be seated during the terrorizing stapling scene. Okay, a few little wrinkles and creases. It doesn't matter. It's pretty tight. And now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to go put this on the table and hammer these staples down nice and tightly since they didn't go into the wood the whole way. You could see that. I'm going to just hammer them down now. The screen is complete. You can see I hammered those staples in now. What I'm just going to do is take a pair of scissors and just trim some of this excess that's around here right up to the wood. And now we have a screen that really looks like if you bought a kit that came with one screen, looks very similar to what we just made. Now let's get on to actually doing our design that we're going to print, as well as getting this screen ready to accept the transfer of that design.
Now we're going to create the actual design that's going to go on the shirt. For this, you need to use any program that lets you put text on a page. So that could be Word, Google Docs, PowerPoint. Here I'm using Inkscape. It's a really powerful free drawing package that's available. There are lots of tutorials out there for all the different features that Inkscape has, but I'm going to just do the most basic thing possible, which is lay out some text. So that's not really an interesting font. Let's fix that. And it's a little small. And I will center it. The color here should be black. We'll discuss that in a few minutes when we have the transparency printout ready to go. The color that is on the shirt is going to be determined by the ink that you press through the screen. But for now, for this design, you want it to be completely black. If you're like me and you don't have any natural artistic ability, the secret that I like to use is I go out to the web and I search for logo fonts or comic book fonts, and there are all kinds of great resources that have a lot of character, that'll give your shirt a unique design, and you can install these and use these in Inkscape.
I've dimmed the lights here for this next part to add a little bit of suspense, but also because we are going to be working with some photo emulsion. This is what makes this type of screen printing that we're going to be doing possible. This photo emulsion is a light-sensitive material. It hardens when it's exposed to light. And you'll see when we get to the next stages, basically, we're going to put the image that we want on a transparency over a screen that's been coated with emulsion. We're going to expose it to light, but the light is not going to be able to pass through where we've created our image. It's only going to hit the areas where our image isn't. Then we're going to take the screen, we're going to rinse it out in a sink, and we're going to be left with basically the only place that that doesn't have this emulsion on it, where the ink can pass through, is the part that we covered. I probably didn't explain that well, but all will be made clear as we progress here. The main thing is we need to coat the screen with this emulsion now. And this emulsion usually comes in two parts. There's usually sort of like the base, and then sort of a sensitizer that you add to it. The sensitizer is what makes it react with the light. And once you mix those things together, you put it in. You have to store it in a dark place, which is why this can is also black. So we're going to do our first application of this to the screen now. And what we want to do, again, I've got the lights a little bit dimmer here, because once we put this on the screen, as I mentioned, it's going to be sensitive to the light. So we want to put it in a cool, dry, dark place for 4 to 6 hours to to let it dry. Now you can hasten that time by carefully holding a hair dryer from a distance, because too hot and you'll melt the screen. But we're not in a rush here, so I'll just coat the screen and we'll put it someplace dark to dry. So I'm going to open the lid here, which never cooperates. Now I'm going to have to pause the video to go run this under hot water so I can get the lid off. I'll be right back. Man, that was on there tightly, but got it loosened now. Usually this stuff is either blue or green. And I'm just going to use, remember our rubber spatula from earlier, I'm just going to put a little bit in here and just spread it over the screen lightly. We're going to use our scraper for the first time here also. So actually you can just kind of make a little line of it across the top. Don't use a lot. This is a good chance for you to be experienced, to get some experience with how the scraper is going to work and how it's going to distribute the paint later on. So I'll just put the lid on that, grab my little scraper, and basically just go back and forth over the screen. You don't want a thick coat. You want it very thin. So you can use both sides. Oh, see, now I mentioned my scraper. My small frame, my scraper doesn't fit all the way in there, so I'll have to kind of be careful trying to do mostly strokes in one direction here. And when you sort of get the screen covered, you want to cover it completely. I don't like overdoing it. I like kind of adding some of this emulsion as I go. And I'll kind of just glob some into the areas here that where I know I'm going to need some more. And there are certainly people who have this down to a science and can do it perfectly the first or second time. It doesn't matter. You can take a few times to get it right here, right up to the edge of the wood. Okay, flip it over. You want to be a little bit conscious of the time that you're working on it, especially here with a little bit of lights on. And it's okay if you don't get it all the way up to the edge. So I'll actually leave a little bit of a gap here on this edge and in some other little spots, because I'm going to show you how to fill it in later anyway. But you don't want it super thick. You're kind of pushing on the screen a little bit as you go. You can see I'm kind of globbing it as I push it on the wood here. You can scoop some of that out, put it on the back and other places. And there you go. And this is, right now, we're just applying this photo emulsion, but this is very similar to how you're going to work with the ink later on, forcing it through the screen. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to put this in a cool, dry place to dry off for 4 to 6 hours. Meanwhile, let's go create our design for the shirt. To print your design out, you're going to need some transparency paper, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's clear plastic sheets. They're made to go through either a laser printer or an inkjet printer, so make sure you get the correct type for your type of printer. I bought this package that comes 100 per box, so I can make a lot of shirts and a lot of mistakes before I need to buy another supply. And here is my sample design that I printed out. Now let's talk about the next step, getting this design onto your frame. The first thing I want to point out is, if you notice the text on my shirt and the text on the frame, you'll see that the raised part of the frame here, not the part with the screen on it, this is where the text reads correctly. See, this is what matches here. So, but we're going, and that's the side that you push the ink through when you're working. But we're going to do it backwards here. We're going to use the back of this to transfer the image. And how we're going to do that, and this is important because you'll see obviously it's the negative, so we have to make sure that we put the image correctly so that you don't end up with a shirt with the text backwards on it. So you want to take your transparency and you want to imagine, okay, what would this look like on the shirt? That means you want to put it on. It's going to go backwards on the screen like this. This is obviously a screen that I've already made. Remember, the other one is light sensitive, so I'm going to take that out in a second, but I want to show you the process beforehand. So what we're going to do is, think about this with the screen side up. We're going to put this on a flat surface. Let's point the camera down here for a second. So again, backwards, we're going to take our screen and put it down here. And we're going to need to hold it down, because if it moves around, we're not going to get a nice clean transfer. So one of the things you can do is get a piece of glass. It could just be from a picture frame. Careful, a lot of times that's sharp on the edges. Or you can actually take some of that transparency film and you can put a number of sheets over the top. A nice clean piece of glass. You don't want any little dust marks on here. Also, my screen is a little dirty. Will work great. And we're going to put that glass over in top to hold it down. Now again, just to walk through the process before I actually do it, light, sunlight, incandescent light, fluorescent light, all of these things is going to cause the screen, where we coated it, to harden, except where the light gets through, where it's black. Now, certain types of photo emulsion are sensitive to some types of light more than others. What you can, and this is kind of a little bit of a trick that you'll just have to kind of figure out through experimentation and get the timing right. Generally, sunlight will work really well, but sunlight also works very fast. So how long do you expose this to light once we do this, once we put it together? If you are using an incandescent lamp, let's say 150, 200 watts, generally maybe if you can have the lamp, you can maybe clamp it onto a table, or you can have a desk lamp about 10 to 15 inches for maybe about 13 to 15 minutes, and that will be perfect exposure time. Whereas if, let's say, you put this on a table outside in the sun, it might only take a couple of minutes. You don't want it to go too long, because light will eventually get through even the dark part of the transparency here. So if you wait too long, it's not going to work. And of course, if you do it too soon, it's not going to work either. So it's a little bit of trial and error. The good news is, if you do not get a good transfer, you can just take some of your screen cleaner and you can spray the screen, rinse it off under cold water in the sink, and then basically let it dry, start over again, put the photo emulsion on there, let it dry, and then experiment with the times again. So it took me a few times to get this right, but just, again, be patient in practice, and eventually you'll figure out what works for the equipment you have, and it'll all work great. Okay, here's our screen from earlier, and basically I'm putting that screen side up, and putting our design on top of it, covering it with a piece of glass, and we want to make sure it's kind of in the center. I don't want to move it around much. And then, as I mentioned, you've got to experiment to get the timing right. I made this little kind of wooden table, and I bought this light from a big box store. And for me, I found, again, this is in the 13 to 15 minute range, and this will get me a nice transfer. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, leave the light on for 15 minutes, and then we'll see how we wash it out in the sink, and we'll be ready to apply ink and transfer this design onto a shirt. Okay, moment of truth. Here we are by the sink. I'm going to take my piece of glass and my transparency off and set them aside. And what you want to do is rinse this under cold water until you start to see your pattern come through. You can use a little bit of just going over it lightly with my fingers here. If you have a sprayer, I don't have one on this sink, but that's helpful. And probably can't see on the video. You can do from the other side also. I'm already starting to see the pattern on here. I have some globs, unfortunately, from when I spread it a little bit unevenly. You want to try and avoid those globs like that. Just lightly going over it with my fingers, moving it around, not staying in one place too long. If you do get those globs, it's a little bit harder, but eventually you will be able to, they will wash away. You can see it's starting to come through. If you use warm water, it'll just take all the photo emulsion off. So that's why, unfortunately, it would seem tempting to do that, and certainly nicer on your hands, but we can't do that. And flip it over again. And now you can see it's starting to come through in some of these spots. And starting to come through. Kind of the fun part of the process here, almost as much fun as making the shirt, is seeing your transfer come out. They said a little bit, generally happens a little quicker if you use a sprayer. Getting very close. And if you see that you're starting to maybe take off a little bit of the pattern, you maybe didn't get a perfect transfer there. I'm seeing I'm probably pushing a little bit hard there with my hand. That's okay. It just means that if it's small designs, you can fix it with the paintbrush later. If it's really bad, then you may have to go back and do it again from the beginning. This transfer, I think probably because I'm using my hand and not the sprayer, this might be one that I would go back and do over again. Now, I'm not happy with the results that I'm getting. So if you're not happy with how it came out, no reason to get upset. That's what this emulsion remover is for. So we just spray a little bit on here. And let it set for a second, but you'll see it starts to take all that emulsion right off. And this is exactly what you'll do if you decide not to keep your screens, which you may not do initially. You may start with just one screen and need to reuse it. So you'll need to clean it every time, and then it's back to the drawing board. So I'm going to clean this screen off, let it dry, put on another coat of emulsion, try the transfer again, and wash it off. Okay, so try number 2 came out a lot better. I went upstairs and used the sprayer on the sink up there. And now that we have the screen, we're not quite ready to put the ink through this yet. You want to hold this up to the light, and you want to look for any little holes or spots where for some reason you washed away some of the emulsion, but you wish you hadn't. And what you can, sometimes like there's just a speck of dirt on the plate of glass and it stops the light from hardening the emulsion, and you have a problem. So you get your little brush and something called screen filler. Now you don't have to use this screen filler. You can just cut little pieces of masking tape and cover it up, but the screen filler is really nice. It will fill all those holes. You don't have to worry about it separating. You generally do it from the back of the screen here. So I'm just going to, I saw a little spot here. I'm going to dab a little of the screen filler on here. And then you can let that dry, or you can, again, cover it with some tape. And around the edges, you see I've got some spots. I wasn't really careful around the edges with my filler. What I like to do for these areas is just get some blue tape. And what I'll do is I'll mask off all around the edges, so that I don't have to worry about painting all that area in with screen filler when some paint maybe comes through. So just get a big piece of tape and you can come in from the edge a little bit and then just do this on all 4 corners around your picture. Okay, I have masked off the screen. Now let's put this aside for a second and let's talk about shirts and positioning your print. So here's a simple black shirt that I got at an arts and crafts store. You should be able to find shirts easily for $4 to $5 at a retail store or online. Don't skimp on the shirts. You can find shirts for a little bit cheaper, but for $5, maybe $6, you can sometimes find better shirts on sale at major retail stores or even online. You don't need to buy shirts in bulk. There's all different kinds of styles and colors, like cut in for a woman, for example, longer for a tall person. But the bottom line is the difference. This is not the place where you want to save $1 or $2, because you want to have people deliver a shirt that's really soft, comfortable cotton. Again, I'll include some details for a couple of brands that I like. This is a very simple one from a craft store, but there are other shirts that just are really a nice pre-washed cotton, and they're very soft. One of the things that we want to do is very important, put a piece of cardboard inside the shirt, because we do not want our ink to bleed through onto the back of the shirt. And so when you have the cardboard where you want it, now it's time to put down the screen. The general rule of thumb for where you put this, and of course it's completely up to you, but it's the 3-finger rule. So you want to kind of look at 3 fingers down from the top. That's around where you want to put your screen down, and set it down just like that. Make sure you may not have done it completely straight on the screen. The screen might be a little crooked, but just kind of take a step back and sort of eyeball it. It looks like it's centered. Of course, you could be really crazy and measure to different sides of the shirt, but just for this demonstration here, I'm going to just look at it and say that looks pretty good. Something else I should mention is you want the screen to be a little bit off the shirt. You want the fabric, when you push the ink in, you want to have some place for it to go. I just found a couple of washers around the workshop here, and I just put a couple of washers. Some people take pennies and put them under each corner. I put a little piece of cardboard under one, just so that there's a little bit of play here when you push down on it. And what we're going to do before I put the actual ink on, I mentioned I made this a little bit too narrow. Ideally, it would be perfectly wide. I could go in both directions. But basically, we're going to drop a little bit of ink on here, and with a little bit of pressure and about a 45-degree angle, we're going to just draw that paint across the screen, pushing down as we go, and then reverse, go back in the other direction, and we'll be all set. So I'm going to use a little bit of red here, my little spatula that I got. I'm going to take this paint out, and it doesn't really take a lot. That's more than enough. I'll be able to take this spatula and put some back in here when I'm finished. And you don't want to shift the screen around, so just kind of hold it down and just push through. And don't worry if you don't get 100% coverage the first time. Look at all that extra ink I have on there. Just going to push it back. And you really only have to do this a couple of times. Sometimes I go a little bit crazy and do it more than that, more than I have to, I suppose. And you'll be able to take this screen when we're done here and rinse it out. All these chemicals, the modern chemicals for screen printing, are safe to just handle without any gloves on and just wash down the sink. But if you're concerned about that, you can definitely fill up a bucket of water and rinse your screens outside and then dispose of the water appropriately. So I think that's good. What I'm going to do is just kind of scrape up the last little bit of my paint here. We don't want anything to go to waste, so I'm going to keep that on the edge, and I guess slightly off camera here, just scrape it back into the container. I don't want to do that over the shirt in case I make a mistake. Now, before you take this screen off, make sure you don't have any paint on your fingers like I do, because you don't want to accidentally get paint on the shirt. So I'm going to move anything out of the way. And I've still got a little bit of paint to wipe off here. Now, before I take this off, again, this paint is water soluble. So if things don't work out, you can always just take this before the paint dries, put it in the washing machine or rinse it out by hand. Again, let it dry and you can start all over again. So this is very forgiving in terms of mistakes and do-overs. So I'm going to just slowly pick it up, and the shirt is going to separate from it as we go. I'm going to put the screen over here, and there you have it, your first silk screened item. And I see, I guess there was a little bit of the bee there that didn't, or the ink didn't go through. You can take a little brush and you can touch that up, but actually I kind of like those little imperfections that you sometimes get with this process, because it's what really gives it kind of a cool retro feel. So we're almost done. We're almost done. The ink is still wet, and there's two things that I like to do to make sure that it sets. Now, in a professional screen printing environment, there'd be kind of a conveyor belt or some kind of a dryer, and you would put it on. You'd put the shirt on this conveyor, and it would blast this hot air at the shirt and dry the ink. I'm going to use a heat gun here. A hair dryer works fine, and I'm just going to quickly go over the shirt. I'm not going to hold it in any place for one place too long, and I'm just going to let this dry. And once it's dry and not sticky to the touch, I like to get a piece of parchment paper and an iron just to make sure that it's completely set. And then don't move the iron back and forth, but basically just hold it down for 5 seconds or so in a bunch of different spots. Move it along, and this will seal it. I noticed when it dried, this red, I haven't used it on black before. It's a little bit, it faded out a little more than I liked. I was going to try white. I thought, let me try the red. So again, this is just something you'll experiment with depending on the shirt, the color of the shirt that you're using, the color of the ink. This type of ink is the ink that sets into the fabric. There are also types of ink that sit on top of the fabric. And in that case, the color really won't be diminished so much depending on the color of your shirt. So that's something to think about also. I like just the feel of the fabric, of the ink inside the fabric. I think the shirt is softer. So there we go. As I mentioned, a little bit dim at the end. Let's take out and let's see the final product. There we go. So congratulations, you've made your first silkscreen shirt. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the materials that we use. The great thing about this as a business is that almost everything fits in a shoebox. You've got your spatula, your scraper, your little jars of paint and emulsion. They're really a hair dryer. The screens themselves, the size of picture frames, you could stack those up and put them under a bed. But basically, all the materials you need don't take up a lot of space, which is one of the nice things about this. At the end of the video, again, I'm going to go over the 2 different ways you can get started, but just as a reminder, you can get started with an all-in-one kit from a company like Speedball for under $70. You just supply the shirts and off you go. You can build a kit that will let you create a lot more screens for a little bit money getting started, or you can wait until you sell that first bunch of shirts and then you can put your money back into the business. So this is a really great technique for making small batch runs of custom items, shirts, handbags, face masks. It's a fantastic technique to be able to do that, and you need to look for those opportunities where you can sell these items. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, some of the places you can consider looking are local businesses that are suddenly delivering. They want their workers to have some logo wear from the store on their shirts. Recent school graduations, families that are looking to celebrate a milestone, could be a birthday, an anniversary, again, a graduation, you find out, you know, a lot of schools, people put out little signs, they hang up banners, we have a graduate here, so you drop an advertisement in their mailbox, 5 shirts for X. We'll work through the math in a little bit. But look for those opportunities. Make a shirt for yourself that advertises the business as you're walking along. Talk about the, you know, just put the main message on the front, maybe put a different message on the back with some contact information. Let people see the quality of the product. We just did one color here. There are lots of other videos on the web that will show you how to do screens with multiple colors. I can come back if there's demand and put one of those videos together. But it's basically the same process. You just need to make a different screen for each color, and you, in between coats when they dry, you then need to line up the new screen and put the next color ink on top. So let's talk about, in more specifics, some of the materials and some of the costs, and also what your cost model should be and how you should figure out what you need to price your shirts at, or your material, what you're selling, in order to make a profit. I would say there's always a market for custom screen printed apparel. Obviously, there are stores that are selling shirts all the time with custom slogans on it or branded merchandise. You're not going after that market here. What you should be interested in focusing on are the small opportunities that the big players just can't bother with and overlook. I mean, that family of 5 that wants to celebrate a special milestone, or that local business that wants to advertise their services, or maybe those first responders that you want to show support for, or some other local group or organization. They don't necessarily want to go to a major supplier and pay major supplier prices to get the merchandise that they want. So you want to focus on your immediate local market, and that could be those organizations that are around you, or it could be you know, friends, coworkers, classmates, students that you know, maybe you're all in a specific club or on a team, and you want to show support for one another and create some custom merchandise. So let's talk about customers before we go any further here, and I show you how to make these shirts. Whether it's a $100 business or $1 million business, you want to think about the product that you're selling. Who are my customers? And you don't want to have a lot of material in stock or laying around that you are forced to sell. This model is really great because you can offer your customers the ability to make a custom shirt design on a colored shirt of their choosing. You can accept the order with a minimal deposit. You can take that money, use it to order the shirts and the supplies that you need, because the costs for doing this are very low, and you can basically bootstrap the business as you go along. In other words, taking the money from those orders to fund the growth of the business. So you don't want to put a lot of your money out up front. You want to keep your costs low until you figure out the types of shirts and the types of material that people want. And then if you decide to have maybe some other items that you want to pre-order some shirts or pre-order some inks that you can deliver items more quickly, that's the time to do that. But when you're just starting out, keep your costs and your expenses low. So one last thing I want to talk about is the pricing. What do you set the pricing for these shirts to be? So the math is actually pretty simple. You know the cost of the shirts are probably around $5 to $6, depending on the quality of the shirt that you get. So keep track of that, $5 per shirt. If you end up ordering a large number of shirts, you might be able to get that price down a little bit. But as I've said, don't skimp on the quality of the shirts. I mean, that's the one thing that people will notice right off. If you want repeat business, use a high quality shirt. The cost of the other materials is actually pretty minor. You have the silk screen material, which for $10 to $20, you can buy enough for probably 50 or 60 shirts. You have the ink, which is anywhere between $10 and $15 a bottle. You have wood, you could use scraps for that. There's obviously your time and labor, which you should account for also. So the cost per shirt, let's be extremely loose with the math now. Let's assume $5 to $6 for the shirt itself, your time plus the materials that you're going to get, $10 a shirt. In reality, it's probably significantly lower than that. It's probably more like around $7 or $8 a shirt, but we need some kind of number to work with. So let's just think about this for a second. So if your cost per shirt is $10 per shirt, what would you sell something like that for? Now, in a retail environment, sometimes the markup can be 50%, 100%. So a shirt that you make for $10, it's not unreasonable to think that a similar shirt, if someone were going to buy it, might be $20, maybe $25. Obviously, you need to find that sweet spot where you're making enough money, but also customers are not put off by a high price. And this really is going to be determined by the area that you're living in and the quality of the shirts that you're making, the quality of the shirts that you're buying, and maybe the quantity of shirts that customers are wanting to buy from you. I'd recommend for at least the first 5 shirts, you charge a fixed price. If you want to give someone a volume discount, the word volume means there has to be some volume there. So maybe you offer a discount after 5 shirts of $1 or $2, or maybe after 10 shirts, or maybe you have different levels. So let's say this shirt hypothetically cost you around $10, and you don't want to start out losing money. So let's not put that number. Let's make sure we start a little bit higher than we actually think it may be. So if your shirt is $10, is $19.99 or $20 a reasonable price? I think so. If you're just getting started, you might want to charge a little bit less, but here's the problem. Whatever price you start out at charging, it's very hard to move that price up or down afterwards. People are going to say, hey, I ordered some shirts for you. They were $20. Now they're suddenly $25. Or, gee, I just ordered some shirts for you for $25, and now a couple weeks later, they're $14.99. What's going on? So you do want to try and keep the price set that you do decide to go with. Again, I feel that given that this is a handmade item that you're making and that you're putting your personal time and effort into designing the layout and making it from scratch, I don't think $20 is an unreasonable price. But you might find, let's say that you really have some artistic skills and you're able to design some custom logo wear, then you might be able to get a higher price, because now it's not just a question of you putting a simple text on here like I did. You're also, your artistic contribution to what you're creating, that also has some value too. So if you're able to create some more interesting designs or some funny sayings or things that just make the shirt seem even more cool, then you might be able to charge a little bit more money for it too. Okay, I think I've talked enough about the business model and how to actually make your own silkscreen t-shirts. If you'd like more information, just do a search on the web. There are a lot of other helpful videos out there for learning how to silkscreen. So good luck with your business. Before we wrap up, let's look at the shopping list to get your screen printing business started. If you go for an all-in-one kit to start, Speedball makes one. It's around $44. It includes a sample frame, a couple of different colors of ink, some photo emulsion, a squeegee, a paintbrush, basically everything you need to get started except some shirts. Make sure you get the set that includes the photo emulsion if you want to do the type of transfers that we did in this video. If you want to make your own kit, you'll need some screen printing fabric, some photo emulsion, 1 or more jars of ink, a screen printing squeegee, some emulsion remover so you can reuse those screens, and a staple gun. And that will run about $78. Again, you'll need to supply a little bit of scrap wood and the garments. Also, just bear in mind for the inks, water-based versus plastisol. Water-based is what I used in this video. For darker colors, it soaks into the fabric. It's nice, but it tends to lose some of its brightness. A plastisol-based ink, that's the kind of ink that sits on top of the shirt, and it'll generally be a lot brighter, and it's really good for dark fabrics. If you don't want to make your own frames, you can still say under $100, buy some of your own screens. I found a 3-pack online for only $13. Now let's talk about shirts, the all-important shirts. Again, don't skimp on the quality here. I like the next level shirts. They have male cut, female cut, fitted, V-neck, crew neck. You can find them online, different prices depending on the design that you get. Long sleeve, short sleeve from $6 to $15. Gildan is another popular brand. Their t-shirts start at around $5. And Anvil is a great brand also, and I really like their sweatshirts, their hoodies if you want to make those. So again, depending on the type of shirt you buy, the range might be from $10 to $30. And of course, you'll adjust your prices based on the apparel that you're printing. Thanks again for watching, and good luck with your business.